What's this? What's this? There's color everywhere. What's this? There's white things in the air. What's this? I can't believe my eyes. I must be dreaming. Wake up, Jack. This isn't fair. What's this? What's this? What's this? There's something very wrong. What's this? There's people singing songs. What's this? The streets are lined with little creatures laughing. Everybody seems so happy. What's this? There's children throwing snowballs instead of throwing heads. They're busy building toys. Absolutely, no one's dead. The store's gonna be window. In my bones, that's oh look, what's this? They're hanging on the switch. They kiss? Why that is so big. It's fire. The gathering around it in the store roasted just a lot there. What's this? What's this? In here, they've got a little tree. How queer! And who would ever think? And why? They're covering it with tiny little things that got electric lights on strings, and now they smile and they want to know who they are. Looks like promise, looks like bottom. Who they be? I got my wish. Oh my, what now? The children are asleep. But look, there's nothing underneath. No ghouls. The witches here to scream and scare them more and scare them only. They're insecure inside their dream. What? The monsters are missing and the nightmares can't be found. And in the place there seems to be good feeling all around. Instant screams, I swear I can hear music in the air. The smell of kids and eyes are absolutely. The sounds, they're everywhere all around. I've never been so close before. This empty place inside of me is spilling out my city. Can't think of how long you know I went to it. You know, what is this place that I am now? What is
Festive greetings, our Legion of Elves and Reindeer. Welcome to Podcast of Storm. We're socially awkward snowmen, crazy stalking stuffers, and all around naughty list members. Convene to talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my host, the Jolly Hollywood Firm, aka the Authenticator, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello, everyone, and happy winter solstice. The that song always makes me happy because that song basically exemplifies me on Christmas morning every fucking year, and I kind of really needed it because my entire household has been a bunch of Grinches and Scrooges for basically the entirety of December, and it's beginning to slowly but surely bum me out.
It's fascinating. I mean, mine hasn't. I mean, we haven't really been like overzealous, nor have we really been Grinches. I mean, we've had a pretty chill December so far. Pardon the pun. I mean, we literally. To be fair, we have procrastinated. We have procrastinated a little bit in some parts. I mean, we just set up the Christmas tree today.
We set up the Christmas tree last night, but it has yet to have lights on it, and Mom always puts the lights on it before I put the ornaments on it, so we're still waiting to decorate it.
I mean, we haven't really decorated our tree in a while, just because like it's kind of a big hassle, and we don't really need to put lights on it because it has lights built into it. Just gotta plug it in. Yeah.
So you have one of those fiber optic ones?
We had one of those, but it kind of caused some problems. So we just have like one that has like string lights set up on it, and you just gotta plug it in. Like it's like a collapse. No, it's in 3 pieces. You put it together, and then like you put the plugs together, like plug them in.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it just turns on lights. It has 3 functions. One is just pure white light. One is color full, just blank full color lights, right? And another is it shifts between the color and the white, just like a slow, gentle fade.
Yeah, the rotating color thing. I've seen those.
Yeah. So we've had that for a few years, like 2020.
Every year, my mom does the lights and I handle the ornaments. That's usually how the split up of the Christmas tree related labor goes. And I press gang my brothers into helping me if there's one that I can't if I can't reach high enough to get to one. But my brothers don't like helping with the tree, so it's usually a combination of me and my mom that do the actual decorating.
Trying to think here. Well, no, I guess I don't need to think. So we have kind of a stacked week this week. I don't know. I'm undecided on it, and I forgot to bring this up to Dalton earlier. I don't know if now we're all going to be busy, to be honest. So we're not going to do like a special Christmas episode or anything for the podcast.
Most likely not, and I think that's Tuesday or Wednesday.
Wednesday. I only know that because my work is letting me take those days off, Christmas Eve and Christmas.
Well, good for your workplace. Although, in fairness, if you mentioned to me that
I was working Christmas,
you were working Christmas, people would be cursed. I'm just saying. I am not beyond sicking the IRL equivalent of the Christmas ghost on some people. God damn it!
I mean, to be fair, I was honestly under the impression I was going to work Christmas Eve at the very least. I knew I wasn't going to work Christmas. No one works Christmas, really. Unless you have a really shitty boss.
Which, again, leads me back to...
I don't have a shitty boss.
Pulling a Dickens on some motherfuckers. If that ever happens to you.
Yeah, I don't have really shitty bosses. I have bosses that annoy the fuck out of me. But they're not bad.
I mean, that is sort of part of the job description of an employer most of the time, unfortunately.
But to be fair, it's little things. It's nothing like too big.
Yeah, they're not cunts.
No, it's just that whole thing of like I'm busy working on something and I'm told to work on this other thing.
So it's not that one. It's not that one Napoleon syndrome that you worked with when you were working at the restaurant that you and Martin both worked at.
My uncle, yeah. Me and my uncle.
Yeah. Oh shit, I shouldn't. Fuck. I'm pretty sure you've mentioned his name on here before.
No, I always try to say uncle.
Fuck.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's good. I really don't think it's that hard. There are like millions of barns. I'm not even going to worry too much about that. But yeah, just stick with saying my uncle from now on, please.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that was my bad. I misremembered some shit. Must be.
All right. So yeah, we Dawn found some stuff. I found a thing. You all know how it works.
Yeah. Brainstormer was in charge of the positive one because she's better at that than I am. My detector goes ding when there's stupidity, ideological bullshit, and cringe. It does not go ding when there's happy shit. Unfortunately.
I want to say you're a doomer, but I really don't think that is an apt description for you.
Well, no, because I locate the cringe and the ideological stupidity so as to argue with the cringe and the ideological stupidity. I am a heat-seeking cringe missile. I find the cringe so as to destroy the cringe.
All right, so this is from historycooperative.org, written by I'm going to pronounce his name wrong, and I do really apologize.
He's never been good with names for as long as I've known him. That's probably not going to change anytime soon, folks.
Okay, it's hard. Okay. If I hear it, then I can pronounce it right. But if I'm just reading it, names aren't.
Your brain doesn't break down pronunciation very well.
Yeah, it's okay. Tell me, how often sometimes a name is spelled differently, but yet is said differently?
And as we just covered earlier tonight, your uncle apparently still misspells your name, even though your name is relatively simple.
That was just one time. All right,
I am going to razz him about that if I ever end up meeting him, though, because that is comical levels of bullshit.
Retica Dar. Again, I'm sorry if I pronounced it wrong. This is published November 1st, 2024. So, okay, this is actually pretty recent. Usually when we do these theme months, these articles are really far behind.
Yeah, I often don't know why certain articles relating to certain holidays aren't like published closer to those holidays. Like I remember once during, I think it was a Halloween month, there was a March article that was Halloween related, and I was just like, what in the fuck is this?
Yeah, I don't know. Okay. So shall I start or anything?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. The origins of Christmas can be traced back to the ancient Roman and Norse civilizations. In fact, 25th December was not even Jesus' date of birth. The early Christians appropriated that what was originally a pagan holiday because it was convenient. Before that, the people of ancient Europe had celebrations of the pagan god Saturn or even Odin at the end of December to mark the shortest day of the year. Indeed, many of the Christmas traditions we have today come from these ancient festivals. Examples of this include kissing under the mistletoe and decorating trees.
That's a little bit of an oversimplification. Yule wasn't specifically a holiday to venerate Odin. Odin served in the role of the Yule Father. That was one of his many names / titles. And that's probably where most of the Santa imagery comes from, because, you know, Odin being a very old gentleman, and, you know, obviously riding in a sleigh because, well, Nordic country. Most of that is where we get the Santa imagery that we're all familiar with. But yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than just Yule being a celebration of Odin. It was more like Odin led the festivities among the deities around that time. And Saturn was the Roman god of time, because he was essentially the Roman equivalent of Kronos, and as such, he also had agricultural associations, which led to him being tied into the solstice. Anyway, we will now wait for Brainstormer to reappear, one way or the other. Yeah, but yeah, the three associations for Saturn were time, entropy / decay, or I guess 4 associations. There was time, entropy / decay, the harvest, and death. In fact, it's highly likely that at least some of the Grim Reaper imagery was originally sort of back-sourced to Saturn, because being a god of both time and the harvest and death, he carried a sickle, because sickles were what you used to harvest things. And that's probably one of the origins of the Grim Reaper imagery of him carrying a scythe. And now we wait for Brainstormer. I was hoping that if I babbled a little bit more, it
I'm
would
back.
show more that I did. Okay, there we go.
Oh, Sorry, I was getting a drink.
It's alright.
Yeah, I didn't realize how thirsty I was until we started the stream.
Out of curiosity, do you guys have eggnog?
No,
Shame.
I got milk.
It's not the same. We haven't gotten any eggnog yet, but that's probably because my mom usually does shopping for like snacks and stuff around Christmas Eve, and we still are 3 days out there from. Anyway, moving forward.
Well, the pagan origins of Christmas. The origins of Christmas are complex and intertwined with various cultural and religious traditions, including some pagan elements. While Christmas is primarily celebrated as a Christian holiday commemorating the birth of Jesus Christ, it coincides with the winter solstice and incorporates elements from pre-Christian traditions.
Small print here. I don't know if they're going to mention this later, but they haven't mentioned yet the festivals of Caecilia in what was ancient Sumeria and Babylon, or the Persian, or what is now Iraq, Mithra festival, which was a minor deity of, I believe, wine, sort of a regional version of like Bacchus or Dionysus, whose feast day was December the 25th. Anyway, moving along.
Okay. The winter solstice for the northern hemisphere takes place on 22nd December, the day when the Earth's axis is tilted furthest away from the sun. It is the shortest day of the year and is meant to mark the beginning of winter in the northern hemisphere. But it is also a time of hope because the days begin lengthening again as spring is coming.
Being pedantic here, the 21st is the solstice. The 22nd is the day after. But yeah, again, that was me date fact checking. But yeah, the actual solstice is the 21st, the shortest day and the longest night. The 22nd is the day after, when, as the author points out, the days start lengthening again. Moving on.
Ancient civilizations around the world thought this was worthy of great celebration. When the early Christians linked these winter solstice celebrations with Christmas, it simply made the birth of Jesus that much more auspicious.
Well, and also tied into the principle of death and rebirth. The idea was, from a Christian perspective, that Jesus was the rebirth of human, like, salvation from, like, you know, the altering of the covenant between the Old Testament covenant that had to be repaid in blood with like animal sacrifices, and the New Testament covenant that substitutes that sacrifice with the sacrifice of Jesus' own death and blood. Hence the dying for our sins bullshit. Anyway, moving on. Yeah.
A lot of people in the modern world may not even know that this winter celebration actually has nothing to do with the scriptures and religion. They may be even more surprised to learn that Christmas celebrations like decorating the holly, putting up Christmas trees, and kissing under the mistletoe are rooted in actual fertility rituals. These are all symbolic acts to celebrate the fertility of the earth and the approach of the sowing season, I believe.
I think that's a bit of a partisan picture. You tended to venerate winter for its own sake as the peak of death, more or less, and also attempt to essentially jumpstart the spring by channeling the energies of stuff that was alive into the seasonal cycle again. Think similar to the way in those shows, The Librarians, Jenkins refers to Santa Claus recharging the human race's karmic battery. It's similar to that, but instead of a karmic battery, it's essentially a restoring of vitality after a fashion. This gets complicated when you bring hemispheres into it, but that's getting off into the weeds of metaphysical mechanics and probably outside of the scope of this article. Moving on.
All right. Who were the pagans? Before throwing the word pagan around, we should first discuss what it means. Who were the pagans exactly? Paganism was originally a word used by the early Christians to refer to the polytheistic Romans. What it essentially means is non-Christian. Kind of figured.
Well, it's more complicated than that. The word pagan comes from the Latin paganos, which means country folk. Specifically, it was a word used by the church to invalidate and demonize the folk traditions and superstitions of the country folk who were the longest to hold out with regards to polytheism, because the people in cities, by usually happens with cities, people who live in cities are the most likely to be trendy with the way society is going. So very often it was the people who lived on the margins of cities or out in the country who kept versions of their previous polytheistic beliefs the longest. That's why the word pagan or paganos was turned into a derisive term eventually. It was essentially the newly minted Catholic Church way of calling everyone who still believed in polytheism after the advent of Catholicism Hicks, which I know Brainstormer will probably find funny.
Okay.
Yeah, moving on. The joke there, in case anyone didn't get it, is Brainstormer likes to razz me for being a country bumpkin quite a lot.
Yeah, but I say hillbilly, not hick.
Yeah, but point being, the word paganos actually refers to essentially folklore, and got tied into polytheism specifically because that was the main differentiation between the ostensible monotheism, in practice more like monolatric henotheism, because high god rather than singular god, of Catholicism and the already existent folk beliefs of the Europeans. Anyway, moving on.
All right. It can apply just as well to the Norse people in Scandinavia or the ancient Celts in the British Isles. As the Christian missionaries began to roam around Western Europe and the larger world, they used the term pagan to refer to anyone who did not share their beliefs on religion, or multiple gods were classed within the single category of pagan gods.
Well, there again, it's not exactly cut and dry, because in the same way that the Christians tried to rebrand and appropriate solstice festivals of various kinds for the sake of Christmas, and would later do the same thing with spring festivals with regards to Easter, they also would frequently rebrand a lot of pagan deities as either demons, fairies, or saints, depending on how much they could propagandize. That's why, for example, there is a Catholic saint known as Saint Brigid, who is very obviously a humanization of the Celtic goddess Brigid in many ways. And there are other examples. That was just the one most conveniently to hand off the top of my head. But yeah, very, very often when they could get away with it, they would try to class a existing deity as something other than a deity, either a demon or a fairy or a saint, depending on how well they could propagandize, or I guess how much they hated the existing deity.
Hey, Dalton?
Yeah.
Just kind of a mental note for later that we should have discuss Saint Bridget related to a certain project we have in the works.
Yeah. I've already got some ideas with regards to that, so remind me of it on Thursday or whenever we decide to talk about it again.
I'm not working. Oh, you don't have anything on Tuesday, do you?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
I'm not doing anything Tuesday, so hang out then too.
So
Yeah.
if you want to, we can do Tuesday as well.
Okay. All right, moving on.
Yep.
All right.
Moving forward.
In the first few centuries of Christianity, the Christians wanted to spread their religion around Europe, but they were also quite fascinated by the religions that already existed. They knew that it would be difficult for ordinary people to completely divorce themselves from everything they had always known. This included the celebrations for the winter solstice. They had to give the people something that was familiar and known, given that Jesus was born around the same time. It was easy. Hold on.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Last sentence. It was easy enough to incorporate existing traditions in the celebration of the birth of Christ. Okay.
That's somewhat of a partisan picture of what is likely to have happened, and paints the Christians as a lot more open-minded and savvy than they were, at least to begin with. Usually the way it happened was the Christians coming along and trying to destroy as many sacred sites as they could, and when that inevitably didn't make the existing peoples predisposed to them, and very often resulted in a lot of rebellion against them. For example, it took, I think, close to 1,000 years before the Christianized Romans were able to actually conquer Scotland in a meaningful way. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the older beliefs lingered there longer than in other places. But point being, usually the way it went was Christians come along, say, this is the policy of the empire now, so you need to stop celebrating that shit. The existing people going, no and fuck you, and then warring about it for several decades. And then someone finally got savvy enough to go, okay, you can keep the existing beliefs, we're just going to reflavor the reasons why you're doing it for reasons. And that was, then people finally started to be like, okay, as long as we can keep doing the same shit, it doesn't particularly matter what your like legal document says. And of course, the stealthy thing is, the first generation you try to take away holidays from will fight you viscerally because fuck you. The second or third generation, after you've successfully co-opted the holiday, though, start believing the propaganda you're selling them, and that's why the traditions change over time and shit. And it must be said, it's probable that large parts of the church also forgot why they did the. I am morally certain that large parts of the church either forgot or were never told in the first place why they were co-opting certain traditions, to the point that they probably, a lot of them, believe their own hype, so to speak. But yeah, just providing the other half of the story, the like non-storybook version, where it takes into account things like, religious warfare and whatnot. Moving on. Unless Brainstorm are left again, presumably.
No, sorry. And I read that. The Romans and Saturnalia festival. The people of ancient Rome celebrated the winter solstice with the festival of Saturnalia. It was meant as a way to celebrate and give thanks to the Roman god of agriculture, Saturn. By the time the winter solstice came out, the last planting season had been completed. Thus, the ancient Romans could then happily engage in an entire week of festivities. Saturnalia festival was usually celebrated between 17th December and 24th December. Even now, Christmas. Hold on.
Sorry.
Even now, Christmas is not really a celebration of one day. It is called the Christmas season, and festivities start well in advance of the 25th of December.
I'm not sure where that timeline comes from, because usually Roman festivals were 2 weeks. Also, speaking of Roman Christmas influencing festivals, there probably should be an asterisk here where we mention the festival known as Sol Invictus as well, otherwise known as the rebirth of the sun, which coincided with the solstice, because, again, the principle was the solstice was the shortest day and the longest night of winter, and the next morning was the quote-unquote rebirth of the sun, because that was when the forces of summer or spring. Most cultures believed more strongly in 2 or 3 seasons rather than 4. That's why you don't hear me use the word spring very often when we're talking about this, because for most of human civilization, spring and summer were essentially the same thing. You'd usually get people acknowledging that summer was a thing and that winter was a thing, and rarely you would get people acknowledging the intermediary period between them, and that's where, autumn/fall comes from. But for most of human history, 4 seasons was at least 1 season too many, according to most people's calendars. Moving on, though.
In the Saturnalia festival, 25th December was considered the climax and had a special name, Bramilia. During Saturnalia and Bramilia, all social hierarchies were overturned. The people, including the Roman slaves, indulged in widespread merrymaking. The slaves could even take part in public celebrations and not work on the last day of the festival. Public gambling was a big event, and everyone was allowed to wear colorful clothes. The Phrygian cap, worn by the freed Roman slaves, was worn as a symbol of the freedom of the season. Many of the modern Christian traditions originate in the ancient Roman Empire.
Something worth noting about this whole class inversion thing, it was expected as part of a noblesse oblige type thing that during the festivals of Saturnalia, the gentry of Rome, the land-owning classes of Rome who employed servants and slaves, were expected to give gifts or allow their slaves to feast as part of essentially a sign of, we appreciate the work you do the rest of the year. This is us fulfilling our noble obligations, etc. I know, the author of this article definitely did imply that, but at the same time, providing a slightly more complete version of the story is part of my role here. But yeah, part of the inversion of Saturnalia was the last shall be first and the first shall be last, and it is expected of those who are noble to pay back the servant classes on some level. And yes, that probably does explain why quite a lot of the medieval Christian charity aspect also got rolled into both what was Samhain and is now Halloween, and what was Yule and Saturnalia and is now Christmas. It's highly likely that either polytheistic Rome influenced Christianity to hyperfixate on that aspect, or it was part of the reason why Saturnalia and Samhain were so compatible with being able to be Christianized in the first place, because they already had the last shall be first and the first shall be last, or we should appreciate the things we normally denigrate aspect to them. Anyway, moving forward.
However, there might have been a darker side to the Saturnalia festival. An innocent Roman citizen could be elected as the Lord of Misrule for a period of 30 days for the festival. This was a temporary king of sorts who would preside over the wild partying and drunken acts during the celebration. On the last day, this Lord of Misrule would be sacrificed to Saturn on the altar. This marked the end of anarchy and a return to social conventions. There is no conclusive evidence for this, although folklorists like James Fraser and Mikhail Bakhtin have theorized about it.
I do believe in this specifically because there are younger traditions that have a similar vibe to them. Like for example, in France, there is what's known as the Feast of Fools. Most people in the modern day, or at least most non-French people, probably know about this because it was referenced in Hunchback of Notre Dame, because of course Quasimodo was elected the king of the Feast of Fools, and so on. And there are other similar festivals all around this time, and again, it even does or did influence the approach of Christian traditions around being charitable toward beggars that, of course, eventually became traditions like caroling, wassailing, etc. Or looking at it from a more Halloween-centric perspective, probably also the practice of souling, which became trick-or-treating eventually. Because pretty much for as long as these festivals have existed, there has been some equivalent of Halloween or Samhain, and some equivalent of Yule / the solstice / Saturnalia, which is Christmas. For as long as we have record of this, there have been these two competing festivals that sort of are the light and dark inversions of each other, which again leads me as a practitioner of magic to believe there's probably some metaphysical truth behind this that is next to almost a force of nature unto itself. But that's me, of course, being me as usual. Moving on.
All right. The Romans had another festival around the same time. That is Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, birth of the invincible sun. This was dedicated to the Iranian sun god Mithra. In pre-Zoroastrian Iran, Mithra was the god of the sun, justice, and war. He was heavily associated with the Roman sun god Sol. Emperor Aurelian declared 25th December was the birthday of the unconquerable sun, and it was a festival mostly celebrated by upper-class male Romans. In fact, Mithraism was a special and select cult. It is interesting that Christians decided to celebrate the birth of Jesus on this very day. What is also interesting is that one of the epithets of Jesus is the Son of Justice.
Also worth noting here, one, the person who wrote this article seems to be conflating several traditions, which I'm sympathetic to on the basis that some of these traditions are rather hard to untangle with large degrees of certainty, so that's fair enough. But something else worth noting about Mithras is he was heavily associated with madness and wine, much like Dionysus. And I find that significant because both Bacchus, Dionysus, and Mithras were very often influences for how the early church approached Jesus. And of course, as we know in the story of Jesus, he is famous for, turning water into wine and also drawing people who were otherwise seen as untouchables in society, the poor, the mad, the the destitute, the sickly, the leprous, etc., prostitutes, so on, to his banner. And there's some debate as to how much of that is a Christianization of the aspect of Bacchus and Dionysus that were sort of gods of the downtrodden, and the associated gift of divine madness that both Bacchus and Dionysus, and I believe Mithras also, were said to bring. And that very much might have wound up being folded into the Christian ideas of like divine inspiration and shit. Again, some of these traditions are rather hard to untangle from each other and so on, but again, I'm here to provide at least as much context as I feasibly can be moderately certain of.
Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
All right. What was Yule? Other than Saturnalia, one of the festivals that had a huge influence on Christmas was Yule. Celebrated largely by the Norse people in Northern Europe, many of the old Yule traditions have become Christmas traditions. The celebrations lasted for 12 days and huge bonfires were lit. Feasting and drinking were a big part of the celebrations. The night before Yule was called Mother's Night. The Yule tree was decorated around the time of the winter solstice, and the Yule log would be lit so that families could feast and be merry by the fire all night. The Yule ham was a huge aspect of the celebration since the boar was sacred to the pagan god Freyr. The Christians have appropriated many of these traditions to celebrate Christmas.
I don't like appropriating is fine, and I think I've used it on occasion, but I don't think it was quite as cut and dry as just we're taking your shit. And again, I wonder how widespread the knowledge of said intentional appropriation was in the early church, because much in the same way as the second and third generation pagans were, slowly, frog boiled into believing in more Christian things by way of recontextualizing existing traditions, so too a lot of the church fathers either were never informed to begin with on the intentional appropriation thereof, or were second and third generation Christians in the early church and therefore probably wouldn't have known quite what they were intentionally appropriating or otherwise. It actually wasn't until the Renaissance, when a lot of pre-existing polytheistic material was rediscovered, that the folks that would eventually cause the Protestant Reformation became savvy to the fact that a lot of the Christmas and All Hallows Eve traditions didn't really make much sense from a Christian perspective when you actually look at the damn thing, i.e. when you actually read the Bible for yourself rather than just believing what the father tells you. Which of course led to the likes of Oliver Cromwell and company trying to ban both Halloween and Christmas, but fuck that guy in every conceivable hole for the remainder of time, because just because something good comes from another culture doesn't mean you should shun it for moral purity derp reasons. Moving on.
Also, hello, Giant Turtle. Sorry, I did not see your comments until now. I was on the other tab the whole time.
Yeah, we probably should go over his comments.
20 minutes. I'm late and 20 minutes behind, but here, though, we'll be started by family stuff, so it might be half here. No, that's cool, man. You're good. I'm doing well. None of real note has happened, so that's probably a good thing given my life. What I understand, the intermediaries are a bit more important in the temperate climates and non-extreme biomes, no deserts, for instance. Otherwise, it's rainy and dry season, winter and summer, light and dark for really far north, etc.
Well, and that once again goes back to, for a large part of human history, the year was broken up into either 2 or 3 seasons, because in the temperate climates you had rainy and dry seasons, or rather in the temperate climates you had winter and summer, and in the tropical or subtropical regions you had rainy season and dry season. Although I haven't looked into the particulars as to which side is responsible for which of those, because I could see the wet season being winter's thing, because obviously moisture is something heavily associated with winter, but then again, summer is usually the life-giving set of forces here. So I will actually have to look into that now, because I'm just curious which of the Queens of Fairy would be responsible for that in that case. In any case, moving on.
Right. Another important pagan holiday during the winter solstice was the birthday of the Greek god Dionysus. The Greek god of wine was celebrated with wild revelry, feasts, drunkenness, and merrymaking over 12 days. His birthday was supposed to be on the 25th of December. The festival was called Bacchanalia.
Bacchanalia is the word, and that was the Roman name for it, because the Roman name for Dionysus, or the closest analog to Dionysus, was Bacchus, hence why it's called the Bacchanalia. Again, this person seems to be jumping around the historical timeline a little bit too much, which again, I have sympathies for, because these things can be very hard to untangle at times. But yes, the Bacchanalia was the Roman name for it because the Roman name for the god that was previously referred to as Dionysus was Bacchus. As I'm sure Dragon Turtle already knows, because our mutual friend Chrononaut actually has a long-term relationship with the god Bacchus. Probably not as explicitly transactionally or as explicitly binding as my relationship with Mab, but nonetheless. We both have sat on Discord calls while Chrono regales us with him and Bacchus getting up to random shit stories. In fact, there's this one story that Chrono told us where he was tasked with going in and exorcising a place that was infested with demons, and he essentially forced the demons to behave by summoning Bacchus and essentially convincing him to start a party with the demons, which then obliged the demons to behave under the rules of hospitality and shit. Chrono is sometimes very, very strange. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. That's just a interesting sidebar type shenanigans.
All right. In Finland. Also, for the record, isn't Dionysus referred to as a god of insanity as well?
Yes, divine madness, or I forget the word for it. Divine madness or catharsis was something that was explicitly associated with Dionysus and Bacchus and also Mithras.
Okay, I'm gonna be fully honest. The only reason I know that is because I watched a video that was pitching a Wonder Woman animated series, which should happen at some point, and they had Dionysus as the main villain.
Okay, that's a very weird poll. I guess it's better than having Hades be turned into the devil for the checks notes 1,000th time this week.
Or do Ares, honestly. He's the easy one, you know.
Yeah, because he was the hothead to such a degree that he, in the Greek context, invented war. Derp.
Yeah.
But in any case, yes, Dionysus and Bacchus were both associated with a kind of divine madness. It might actually be where we get the word catharsis from. It's also one of the ways in which both Bacchus and Dionysus were tied to being kind of champions of the downtrodden. The idea was essentially that in his role as the god of, feasting, partying, and drunkenness, he would find people who were miserable and downtrodden and become their benefactors so as to make them happy and party, which was so extreme very often that it would lead to a kind of divine madness. And in ancient Greek times, there were actually considered to be two different kinds of theater in the Greek conception. There was the Dionysian variety of storytelling that was typically associated with tragedy, because the idea was the audience would be so emotionally moved by the tragedy that it would result in catharsis, or a slightly diluted version of Dionysus's gift of divine madness. Whereas Apollo was the one that was typically associated with comedies, because comedy was considered an extension of reason, and one of Apollo's subcategories was he was referred to very often as the god of reason in the Greek sense. This is a complete sidebar, but yes, there's a lot of really interesting lore connections to be made if you dig too deep into mythology. Moving on.
All right. In Finland, the sun goddess Belue was celebrated during this time. She was said to ride on a sleigh made of reindeer bones and pulled by a white reindeer. Perhaps she was a precursor to Santa Claus. I would assume that would be the that Slavic one.
What is her name? I can't remember.
No, his name.
You thinking of Chernobog or
No.
right, the one that's like the regional ancestor of Grandfather Frost, and I just can't remember his name at the moment.
Dead Moors.
There we go. We're both that took us far too long to
Father.
no.
Yeah. Figure to legendary or Morsco. Legendary figure similar to St. Nicholas for Christmas Santa Claus as his root in Slavic mythology. Yeah.
Okay. It is very possible that this also played at least some the thing that the article just cited is also an association, because there are female winter deities that did get folded into, for example, Holda from Slavic mythology, Gryla, the daughter of Grandfather Frost in like Russian places and so on that I can't remember the name of at the moment. And yes, it may also associate with Mab because, Winter Queen and so on. It's often a guessing game of, are all these different names different entities that are like familially related in like a Mother Winter Mab situation, or are these all guises of the same entity taking different names and different titles with different cultures? These are the aforementioned historical ambiguities that are sometimes rather hard to untangle. Like when I'm calling for Mab, I do sometimes add, especially a lot more recently, she who is associated with Scotty, the Kalich, and Nick Nevin, because Nick Nevin was another name for the Unseelie Queen of Fairy, and Scotty is the Jotun of winter in Norse mythology, and the Kalich is a elderly winter goddess in Celtic in Celtic mythology that's also heavily associated with the Unseelie Fae. Although, if you put a gun, or I guess in this case an icicle, to my head, the Cal-Leech probably registers more, at least from where I'm sitting, as Mother Winter rather than Mab. But again, this is why I phrase it the way I phrase it when I'm calling for her. Because I don't know if this is a familial connection thing or if it's the same entity using different names. And I'd rather not offend anyone, so I try to play nicely with both sides of the potential issue. Shit's complicated sometimes. Sorry. Moving.
A lot of people too had their own winter solstice festivities. Karachuan is a pagan holiday that's celebrated in honor of the black god Chernobog, very similar to Samhain and Halloween. This was the day when all Slavic gods associated with darkness and decay were most potent. However, the white god or the sun god is resurrected the next day and triumphs again. Ancient Slavs lit fires in cemeteries and crossroads on this day to keep their loved ones warm. Feasts were organized to honor the dead and feed them. These practices have merged with modern Christmas traditions.
Which for the sake of completeness, there probably is therefore at least some connection between Chernobog and Saturn. Just like there's probably some connection between Saturn and Odin or the Dagda, even though I'm pretty sure they are separate entities, just who both happen to lead their respective Yule festivities. In fact, okay, again, getting into personal sidebars. Recently, after reading some books on medieval oath practices, I ended up calling to One-Eye, Saturn, Raziel, and Prometheus to be what are known as oath helpers betwixt myself and Mab, which were entities or people that you called upon to essentially officiate an oath or a bargain. Usually someone that both parties would know already or would be positively disposed to, hence why I picked the entities I picked. Anyway, moving on.
Alright, celebrating the winter solstice. Many of the Christmas traditions that we celebrate today are descended from pagan traditions. This includes the practice of exchanging gifts, decorating houses, trees, door-to-door carolers, the use of holly and mistletoe, and even the kind of food that is usually prepared. For instance, the Yule log, a cake commonly eaten in Western Europe, is more symbolic than anything now, meant to invoke the bonfires of ages past.
I don't really have any particular objection to that I haven't already gone into relative detail about already. Moving on.
Alright, what does the Christmas tree symbolize? A huge part of modern Christmas is decorating Christmas trees. Modern Christmas trees probably originated in Germany during the Renaissance. The lighting of candles on evergreen trees in order to celebrate Christmas is sometimes traced back to the Protestant reformer Martin Luther. However, the Christmas tree has much more ancient predecessors.
Okay, good. I was gonna say, if you can make it through this without mentioning the Celts, I would be very pissed.
The Romans used to hang small metal ornaments on trees outside their home during Saturnalia.
Also fair. But again, I'd prefer if you got to the Celtic point. Yeah.
Each ornament had some kind of associated with a god or even the family's patron saint. The Roman poet Catullus, in his poem Marriage of Peleus and Thetis, spoke of the gods decorating the home of Peleus with evergreen trees like laurel and cypress. Evergreen trees and wreaths and garlands made of them were significant to the Egyptians, Hebrews, and Chinese. They represented eternal life. From the early Germanic tribes, decorating trees with fruits and candles in honor of Odin was a common practice. Trees were very important in Norse mythology because of Yggdrasil. The Vikings and Saxons worshipped trees. Early Germanic folktales about Saint Boniface and Darner's oak talk of how an evergreen tree grew in the place of the felled oak. The triangular shape was supposed to be reminiscent of the Trinity, an indication to look toward heaven. Thus, we conclude that the Christmas tradition of setting up a tree is rooted in ancient pagan beliefs.
Ahem. You completely missed the Celts there. And considering that the Celtic magician priests, i.e. the Druids, were literally, translatable as oak fathers, that kind of buggers me. But allow me to fill in the Celtic gap that this person left. In the Celtic solstice tradition, there were said to be two kings or two deities. Again, the line between deity and fairy king or queen is sometimes rather nebulous. But long and short of it, in the Celtic seasonal cycle, there were two entities. One of them known as the Oak King, and one of them known as the Holly King. The Oak King oversaw what we would now refer to as spring and summer. The Holly King oversaw what we would now refer to as autumn and winter. That is why, or at least it's one of the contributing factors as to why holly is associated with Christmas as firmly as it is. The Holly King usually is linked with the winter king known as Gwen Abnuth, but again, it's going to take a more autistic folklorist than I to endeavor to disambiguate the connections there. The Holly King is usually associated, the Oak King is usually associated with the Celtic god of the underworld known as Auron, who may have been a precursor slash pre-existing face of the fairy king known as Oberon or Oberion in the Middle Ages. And here again you see the winter summer duality, and yes, this does relate back eventually to the rotating of the courts of fairy, with obviously Oberon being the summer king, and usually it must be said the winter king does not show up as often in more modern folklore. But usually when the winter king is mentioned, it is Gwen Abnuth that gets the credit as the standing winter king. And yes, Gwen Abnuth / the Holly King probably also was a winter seasonal spirit who was heavily associated with both the solstice and eventually influenced the beliefs around Santa Claus, etc., etc. Again, I'm trying to give as much extra context as I can with some degree of certainty. Please feel free to come to your own conclusions and do the research yourself. But again, the aforementioned, this can be very, very hard to disambiguate sometimes thing. Moving on.
Gift giving and caroling. Gift giving is a common practice during most festivals. These are occasions where we can show our affection for our loved ones in the form of material presents. Leaving Christmas gifts under the Christmas tree might be very modern practice, but it's very effective. Giving gifts to your family is as old as humans themselves. The Romans gave each other small gifts during Saturnalia in the hope of a bountiful harvest the next day. It was a way of wishing each other good luck.
Also, and again, this might be the person having a more modern bias than I tend to, but it's highly likely that the practice of giving each other gifts evolved out of giving various deities gifts / offerings at festival times. You know, the same tendency to give the gods offerings that would eventually evolve, in Halloween's case, into trick-or-treating, also evolved from winter solstice festivals to become leaving gifts under the Christmas tree or in the Christmas. Actually, for most of the medieval period, you would leave gifts on rather than under the tree. It was only later, when gifts got larger, that putting them in a circle around the tree became standard practice. Moving along.
Even Christmas carols have ancient roots. The Christmas carols in themselves and their lyrics might be more modern, but the tradition is probably Anglo-Saxon. The Anglo-Saxon tradition of going door to door and singing to your neighbors was called wassailing.
Wassailing is the word
Wassailing.
you are looking for.
Thank you. Wassailing. It came from the phrase "wehe," meaning good health. Every year, these singers would roam around the village in small groups, serenading their neighbors and wishing away evil spirits and bad health.
Yeah, the old Germanic or Anglo-Saxon word that you justifiably butchered was was heil, good health.
I'm tired. Fuck off.
I know, but you have me here specifically to correct you on stuff like this, so don't get mad at me for doing my job. He got quiet. I am imagining him glaring at the screen right now, is what I'm imagining him doing.
No, I'm just fucking tired.
Mm-hmm.
God, work kicks my ass.
Yeah. I don't know if the article is going to go into this, but I will preempt it slightly if it does end up going into this. The practice eventually evolved such that when you would get beggars and poor people wassailing at your door, you would be expected to give them essentially a form of punch, as part payment, part celebration, for their wassailing, and that drink eventually became known as wassail, which is where that comes from, if anyone didn't know already.
I didn't even know there was a drink called wassail.
Yeah, it's like it's a hot punch that usually got made around like Christmas time. Yeah, moving on. Did he seriously just fall asleep?
I was about to. Fucking. I don't know what the fuck is up.
Yeah, your breathing there almost became snore-like there for a second. I was like, wait, did he actually literally just fall asleep?
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I do that when I'm like about ready to fall asleep or like I'm half asleep or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a weird growling I do.
If it worried you at all, you didn't growl from where I was sitting, so you don't need to be embarrassed about that or anything. It just sounded like you were softly snoring, is what it sounded like.
Okay, maybe I should just stand for a bit. Maybe I need to invest in one of those like standing.
I mean, we can also move this stuff to next week, and we can
No,
call it early.
I'm good. I'm good. It's just
because I don't like making you work if you're tired. That's dickish.
No, I'm good. I'm just gonna stand for a bit. Hopefully that'll keep me up. Actually, that does keep me up for like 8 hours a day. So, all
Just
right.
don't hurt yourself, man.
Yeah. If anything, I should probably start considering getting a standing desk instead of sitting down all the time.
I mean, it's reasonable to assume you should be allowed to fucking sit. So
No, just like from what I understand, studies have shown that sitting down all the time when you're working isn't great for you. So
I suppose.
I know you don't give a shit about that part, obviously, because one, you can't really stand for too long.
Yes, and thank you and fuck you. Mostly my lack of caring about that is on the grounds that my friend shouldn't have to fucking kill himself standing up all the fucking time. But yeah, for that little indication there, yeah, you have momentarily suspended my charity.
All right. Wastelers usually carried a traditional drink with them made from mulled ale, roasted apples, spices, eggs, sugar, and curdled cream. Sounds like a very Christmassy drink, does it not? St. Francis, in the 13th century, took inspiration from the wassailers and began the Christmas tradition of door-to-door carolers.
Yes, and it was still tradition to essentially light your carolers up with punch. It was called wassail still for a very, very long time, but there are other sort of Christmas punches like smoked bishop that are probably very heavily influenced by wassail. Anyway, moving on before Brainstormer falls asleep on his feet again.
Now I was sitting down first time.
Well, I also don't want you to fall down and hit your head because you fell asleep for a second. So we should move along.
Right. The significance of holly and mistletoe. Holly and mistletoe were both sacred plants of the pagans. Kissing under the mistletoe and decorating homes with holly were originally pagan traditions. Now they've become such an intrinsic part of Christmas that it would be difficult to imagine the holiday without them. I've never done that. I've never had a mistletoe in my house.
We've had fake mistletoe a couple times, but we've never actually used real mistletoe.
Yeah,
the only time we've ever had real mistletoe in the house is when I had some of it for magical reasons.
Yeah, but no, I mean like just that whole tradition thing. It's never been in my house.
And I already went into greater detail than the author did on why holly specifically is involved. Yeah. Anyway, moving on.
During Saturnalia, the Romans would exchange wreaths made of holly for good luck. Holly was a holy plant that was associated with Saturn, the god of agriculture. The other Christians were lucky that the festival of Saturnalia also coincided with Jesus' birth. Since they were often heavily persecuted, Saturnalia gave them a cover to celebrate their own festival without being discovered. Thus, they began to take on this pagan custom and decorated their homes with holly to make it look like they were celebrating Christmas.
I think that's a very partisan way of looking at it. I think the Christians of the polytheistic Roman period probably borrowed from Saturnalia more than the other way around, because there is absolutely no evidence that Jesus was born during the winter, because that would make him rather unique among people in the Middle East at the time. And we know from like astrological alignments and shit that's mentioned in the Bible that most likely Jesus was born as most Middle Eastern children were during the summertime. So I can believe after a fashion that Christmas and Saturnalia might have influenced each other during Roman polytheistic years, and I we actually have considerable evidence for the aforementioned Christian appropriation of pagan shit. Again, appropriation is a little bit of a harsh word, more than I would probably use in this instance, but yeah. But we don't really have evidence of Christians faking celebrating Saturnalia so hard that they wound up picking up shit from Saturnalia by accident. I'm not saying it never happened, but it didn't happen with enough regularity that we have remaining evidence of it.
Right. All right. During sound or that this made it easier for them to recognize each other in the midst of other communities. They continued to practice even after paganism disappeared from Europe.
It's also possible that they joined in their polytheistic fellows' revels because it was, fun, lest we forget that little canard of, most festivals tended to be, at least on some level, about eating, drinking, and being merry and having fucking fun, as much as said fun would later give Oliver Cromwell a fucking panic attack, and he would try to ban both Halloween and Christmas, but fuck you, Oliver Cromwell, may you burn in whatever hell is appropriate for you at that point. But, yeah, let's not forget that it is also, especially given early Christianity was probably much more in line with the Essenes, i.e. the faction that gave us the Dead Sea Scrolls, and was a lot more focused on self-denial and asceticism in its early days than the Catholic Church would later be. I might be being slightly biased here, but I'm going to give credit to the pagans for teaching the Christians, who were, for the most part, very ascetic monks for the first 200 or 300 years of Christianity, how to loosen up and have a little fucking fun. And if it turns out there is counter evidence to that theory, I will eat the metaphorical crow. But given the sets of people we were working with and the historical eras at the time, I find it far more likely that Christians eventually ended up joining in with the fun of Saturnalia rather than Christianity somehow working fun into the mix, when at the time Christianity was very ascetic and very much about self-denial. Moving on.
Kissing under mistletoe, one of the most popular Christmas traditions, also has pagan roots. The ancient Norse, Celts, and their Druids were all obsessed with mistletoe to a certain extent. Also, the plant was considered sacred to Saturn, and the ancient Romans would perform fertility rituals under it. In other words, they had sex under mistletoe plants for the sake of a bountiful harvest. I guess certainly a step down from that. I mean, yeah.
Because medieval chastity being what it was considered naughty enough that you were kissing someone, let alone buggering them underneath it.
Yeah, we all.
Although, as far as I'm concerned, buggering your lover underneath the mistletoe seems a little bit more fun to me. But
no, yeah, I agree.
Moving on.
Yeah. For the Druids, mistletoe stood for peace and joy. When two enemies met under a sprig. Hold on.
Sprig.
Yeah, sprig of mistletoe. They were required to drop their weapons, and form a truce until the next day. Kissing under the mistletoe is a metaphorical truce of sorts. The plant was supposed to protect one from evil spirits and have magical powers.
Which
be right back.
Probably also lingers on in the story of mistletoe being the one plant in all creation that was able to slay the god Balder by accident. In the surviving versions of the myth we have, it was because Freya thought mistletoe wasn't important enough, but given the widespread aspect of mistletoe having protective properties, I find that to be more than likely Snorri Sturluson's attempt to Christianize something that was previously extant. because when things tend to be universal and pervasive, that usually is a sign that they've been long-standing for longer than the Christian chroniclers are willing to admit. Moving on, though, as soon as Brainstormer comes back.
I'm back. Just had to refill my cup.
Yeah.
All right, is Santa Claus a pagan concept? It's complicated.
80% or so, I would probably go so far as to say yes. The other 20%, of course, relating to either Saint Nicholas of Myra, the actual, Saint Nick, and or the marketing and shit of the Victorian era and early 20th century, which sort of put the final stamp on the concept of Santa in the West.
Which makes me curious about something related to. Okay, sorry, side tangent here.
Yeah.
And for the record, we might just have to hold the next article and just go with the Renegade Cut video. Okay, Rise of the Guardians. We know that Santa Claus was based off more of a Slavic kind of dude, right?
Yeah, he was very obviously either Russian or Eastern European in that.
Yeah, and we've talked about this. It would be more. Would find it interesting if people actually did base him off Saint Nicholas, but that would make him Turkish.
Yeah, Nicholas of Myra's parish was in Myra, which was a town in what was then Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey.
I don't know if we're gonna like, if people want to say like accuracy or whatever, I'm just saying like, okay, make him Turkish, make Santa Turkish.
Yeah, if you want to pull the Saint Nick card, then actually pull the Saint Nick card and make him a Turkish dude. Or you can always go the other way and backdate it to somebody like Wenamnuth or Odin, like a lot of things have recently started doing. Which, by the way, speaking of another reason why Brainstormer needs to read Dresden Files, you will really like Kringle when you get into Dresden Files. Because he is probably the most overt example of the Santa being a badass trope, and also has ties to Odin because reasons.
Although it does make me interested in something, the Christmas lore of sorts, how that could be incorporated if it was Saint Nicholas of Myra.
Honestly, and I might be borrowing slightly from Dresden Files a little bit here, I would essentially make Santa Claus a mantle that passes from one figure to another in that case. And you could even have like Odin retire and pass a portion of his powers as the Yule Father to Nicholas, and so on.
Okay, I'm just curious. Like, okay, was it ever? I'm gonna have to do my own research, given that I am a Christian, and it makes no sense why I don't know anything about Saint Nicholas. Besides,
were you guys Catholic though when you were more active? Is the question.
No.
Because if not, then that's probably why. Because saints are a very explicitly Catholic thing, and one of the many reasons for the Protestant Reformation was the Protestants hated saints and other assorted intermediary type entities because they, to some degree rightfully, complained that it was a holdover from Roman polytheism that the church had to adopt for tactical reasons. Moving on. Sorry. Or go back to what you were saying. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off or anything.
Well, I'm just saying, like, okay, if we're sticking with it just being Saint Nicholas of Myra, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did the sleigh? How does the sleigh, the reindeer, the North Pole, come into play?
that's why I was gonna make the powers of Santa Claus a mantle that he can borrow from other people, because you can still have essentially Odin being a mentor to him, and that would explain the Sleigh Association and the North Pole Association, because of course the Nordic countries are much closer to the tundral regions than
Um,
Turkey.
I think we're also under the assumption, also under the agreement of, we're also of the agreement that instead of it being reindeer, then it would be, in this case, right? This scenario, it would be Odin's steed. Then,
Sleipnir.
yeah.
That is a question, because I don't know if they actually do fold Sleipnir into Odin's like guise as the Yule Father. I do recall there being stories of Odin using reindeer a couple of times, so it's possible. Because
Well, no,
and I'm just saying that because I've never heard. I've heard a lot of lore with regards to Odin's guise as the Yule Father, but or Ulfather, but
well, okay.
but Sleipnir usually isn't involved in those particular stories for whatever fucking reason.
Okay. Well, to me, it makes more sense because, well, with Sleipnir, his whole thing was that he was the fastest, like, steed there was, given that he was born with extra limbs.
Yeah. Also, small detail that would probably be beneficial here. Sleipnir is said to have had 9 legs, and that might explain why 9 reindeer are usually the number people go with.
Huh. It's interesting. Anyway, back to this.
Yeah.
Modern Christmas celebrations are incomplete without Santa Claus. Santa Claus is a bastardized version of the name Saint Nicholas. The image that we are familiar with today was developed, shockingly enough, by Coca-Cola in the 1930s.
Okay, there are 2 reasons why that's a rather biased perspective there. One is Santa Claus isn't a bastardized version of Saint Nicholas. It was specifically what the Dutch referred to him as, Sinterklaas. And that got anglicized by marketers in the Victorian era, and then eventually finalized by Coca-Cola. And again, you're really, there might be a little bit of bias from this author, because it sounds like they're trying to dismiss Coca-Cola's standardization on the grounds of my capitalism. Now, I might be reading a little bit too much into that, because we have dealt with far too many people who do dismiss shit because my capitalism. But the way that was worded does make me think that this person might be a little bit harsh on the idea of capitalism being involved. And as I've said many times before, especially around holidays, and I will say many times again, the reason why capitalism gets involved in holidays is because people want that market to be served, and sane capitalists wind up serving that market. You can't blame capitalism for inventing people's desires. Very often, it is simply a matter of serving the desires that are already there. Moving on.
Okay. Giant Turtle 9, where's the 9th, or is that another dick joke?
No, the first 8 were Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen, Comet, Cupid, Donner, Blitzen, and then of course
the 9 legs for Sleipnir.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, usually it's sort of a sideways leaning leg that's in the back half of his body. it varies in the ways that Sleipnir is usually depicted, but yes, usually the ninth is sort of a semi-lame leg that's off to the side in the back of his body. But no, it's as far as we know, it's not a dick joke. One reminds oneself that Sleipnir was one of Loki's kids, and so it very well might have been on some level. But as far as we know, the ninth leg was actually a leg. It was just weirdly off to the side at one point. But again, Norsemen be how Norsemen be, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. Moving on though, from the potentially blasphemous dick joke there.
All right.
Then again, given how close Loki and Odin are in the actual mythology, they might find it funny. Who knows?
Saint Nicholas, also known as Santa Claus or Father Christmas, was patron saint of children, prostitutes, and the poor.
Also sailors.
Huh.
The person who wrote this article missed one.
That actually makes a lot of sense, considering his basis for Santa Claus.
Yeah.
Oh, what if he flew around in a ship then?
That would be so sort of like the Jolly Roger at the end of Peter Pan kind of thing.
Well, okay, I'm thinking one, it has to be period accurate from when he was a saint, from when he was in Myra.
Well, also regionally accurate, so it would be like a Turkish ship design.
Yeah, or I guess what was it before? What was it before it was called Turkey?
Asia Minor.
Yeah, so an Asia Minor ship pulled by Sleipnir. If we're still keeping within the ideas we were talking about earlier.
This is a very weird setting that we're hypothetically setting up, but it is interesting.
Anyway.
Also, another minor association Santa or Nicholas of Myra has pickles.
So again, it's interesting. Okay, so he lived during the 4th century. Also, him being a patron saint of the of prostitutes, I find that interesting, given how much those that kind of profession gets very much hated.
Well, and ironically, in that regard, assuming that there is some truth to this association, if I was gonna put on like a Christian theology hat for a second here, it must be said that Jesus also was primarily a minister to the unmentionables, the downtrodden, and of course, the lower professions. Famously, Mary Magdalene is said to be a former prostitute that Jesus ends up redeeming. So, despite the visceral hatred that a lot of Bible thumpers have for prostitution because sin of lust, blah, this is yet another case of a lot of Christians don't seem to particularly give two shits what Jesus wanted or thought or did.
Anyway,
yeah, moving forward.
He lived during the 4th century and was well known for giving small gifts to children and the poor. A generous bishop who had a long beard and wore a large cloak. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
However, the origins of a Santa-like figure are much older. Odin, the much-loved king of the Norse gods, was a bearded old man who was believed to leave gifts for children. He's usually depicted as an old man with a long white beard. He also had an 8-legged horse called Sleipnir. Odin would ride Sleipnir across the sky just as Santa does with his reindeer. Young children would fill their booties with straw and carrots during the winter and leave them by the door for Slifner to feed on.
Slightly darker iteration of this. Odin was one of the entities that led the wild hunt, and they would ride around the winter solstice, or around Yule. So, in some rather dark versions of the story, the wild hunt would ride around punishing the wicked around Yule. So, there's probably some parts of the beginning of the naughty nice distinction a little bit. Mythology can be very fucked up sometimes, folks.
Moving on?
Yeah.
Alright. They would be rewarded with little gifts in their booties. This was the true beginning of Santa Claus and the stockings that we leave out on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, originally stockings were filled like that because it was just a practical thing you would do if you had recently done a load of laundry. You would like nail your stockings or your socks to the fireplace so that the fire could then dry them out. Anyway, moving forward.
Yeah. Alright, was Christmas stolen from the pagans? Christianity appropriates the winter solstice. Thus, as we can see, the ancient Christians incorporated several pagan traditions while celebrating Christmas. Perhaps at the time they did it from a sense of safety. Perhaps it was because they generally enjoyed those customs. Looking at these Christmas traditions and customs, it becomes even more evident that the early Christians were not really converts from Judaism. Jesus may have been a Jew, but most of his followers were those on the outskirts and fringes of society. And they paraded the customs they were used to in.
I have to press X to doubt on that one, because there was a existing tradition of what were called wonder workers in Judaic culture. So the idea of a very powerful or pious Jewish priest or rabbi curing illnesses, restoring health, that sort of thing, was well established at the time. So the idea that the early converts to Christianity weren't Jewish, I'm gonna have to press X to doubt that one hard. Moving on, though.
Long before Jesus' birth, the middle of winter was celebrated by people all over the world. It was a victory of light over dark. It was an affirmation of hope. It was a celebration of fertility and bounty. And bounty in the coldest and darkest of times. Thus, feasting, bonfires, and fertility rituals were so important during the winter solstice festivals. The coming of Messiah was simply another occasion to celebrate this time of year. Okay.
At risk of being something of a winter court partisan here, that was a massively biased bit we just read there. It wasn't just about celebrating the coming of what came next. It was also about respecting and paying homage to the glories and or beneficial parts of the winter itself. And again, I realize that I am very much a company man with regards to the winter court. I try my damnedest to be a good courtier, god damn it, but I do very much dislike this like winter only being referenced as like negative bullshit. Yes, winter was a time of death and hunger, but winter also had benefit qualities that were unique to itself. Like that's why there are separate festivals in the winter solstice and the summer solstice. Yes, some part of celebrating the winter solstice was an acknowledgement that the days would start lengthening again, Sol Invictus, all of that, yada yada. But to say that winter didn't have any beneficial qualities, or that you weren't trying to pay respects to winter as much as you were looking forward to the coming of the summer, is partisan as shit. And I like no disrespect to the Summer Queen either, but winter solstice and summer solstice are different festivals for a fucking reason. And I won't stand for this uni-summer propaganda here. Moving on.
All right. Was Jesus really born on Christmas? The simple answer is no. Jesus was probably not born on 25th December. Easter was actually the main holiday of the early Christians. In the first few centuries of Christianity, Jesus' birth was not celebrated in the big way that it is now. The Bible does not even mention a specific date for the birth. Indeed, it was only in the 4th century CE that Pope Julius I declared the 25th of December as the official birthday of Jesus of Nazareth.
To help convert the Celts, the Northmen, and the remaining Roman polytheists that still lingered, because they did linger for an awfully long time. Let it not be said that it was just foreign cultures that rejected the coming of Christianity. The first and foremost priority of the Christianized Romans was convincing other Romans that it was a thing that was worth doing. Because very much in the same vein as the Celts and the Norsemen and the other cultures around them, a lot of the polytheistic Romans told the Christianized Romans to kick rocks, especially after Constantine died. Because obviously during the reign of Emperor Constantine, who was the first Christian emperor of Rome, and the whole reason why Christianity was made the state religion, after his death, though, a lot of the polytheistic Romans was like, that was a stupid period we went through where we all had to pretend there was only one god for a bit. Fuck. Actually, funnily enough, a similar thing happened to the pharaoh Akhenaten when he tried to convince the Egyptians to worship only and solely the creator god Atem during his tenure as the pharaoh of Egypt. And a similar thing happened where basically the second the body was cold, the Egyptians went back to venerating the other gods because, oh, our old pharaoh was so quirky, wasn't he? Kind of thing. There was even an attempt to blacken Akhenaten's name for stripping away the importance of the other gods after his death. Like, we still have the evidence of people like smashing or carving over his cartouche, which was considered to be one of the worst insults you could give a dead person in ancient Egypt, because the cartouche was essentially the symbol of someone's name, and the thought was any damage their name was subject to was something that could also be carried over to the entity it referred to themselves. Anyway, historical sidebar notwithstanding, moving on.
All right. Hold on. Not only is the day of Jesus' birth not known, historians cannot even pin down his year of birth. It was most probably between 6 BCE and 4 BCE, the year in which King Herod died. Some scholars have challenged the winter birth in the first place, arguing that shepherds would not have been grazing their flocks in actual winter. Actual research shows that it was more likely Jesus was born in mid-April.
which I find interesting just on the basis that, like, Easter tends to happen in April, and yet we celebrate his death. But, and by we, I mean the culture broadly, celebrate his death in and around April, and we celebrate his birth in December. When I'm not gonna say the two completely inverted, because we don't actually know when he was crucified. There is a long-standing tradition that it was just after the Jewish holiday of Passover, which is why it tends to linger where it does. Well, that and the aforementioned co-opting of Beltane and other spring festivals, but that's another thing entirely. But it is kind of funny to me that at the part of the calendar where he's most likely to have been born, quite a lot of Christians wind up celebrating his death more than his life. I'm not on this team, so I will leave it for those more theologically concerned as to how heretical or how blasphemous that must be. Although in theory it feels like that would probably be quite insulting if I were a deity and people were celebrating when I was alleged to have died when I was supposedly on my birthday. Like, that'd be like people showing up to your birthday party in funeral clothes. I suspect that would be a little bit awkward. Just one of those humorously potentially blasphemous things. Moving on.
All right. Not only is the day of Jesus, thus 25th December is only a symbolic date chosen for completely different reasons. It's commonly accepted that the Christian Church chose the date to absorb the traditions of the Saturnalia festival. It was originally called the Feast of Nativity. Naivete. By the 6th
Nativity, you had it right the first time.
Oh. By the 6th century, the custom had spread to England, where it began to absorb the more Germanic aspects of the celebration.
Wait, I'm sorry, my brain just might have had an aneurysm over this, but you mention England, i.e. the British Isles, and you go Germanic rather than Celtic.
Visigoths, remember?
Well, and the Saxons were also Germanic and shit too, but the British Isles were for the longest time the main, like, epicenter of Celtic culture. So I'm not saying that I am offended, but if we find out that the person who wrote this article was suddenly murdered in the night by marauding fairies, we probably know why. Because I imagine that the Celtic pantheons and the holdovers of the Celtic pantheons that led to the Fae probably wouldn't be so in favor of that, just ignoring their existence for the most part. Moving on.
When was Christmas first celebrated? They chose society to celebrate Christmas as the same time as the winter solstice to increase the chances of it being embraced by the masses, but this meant that they had to give up control over how it would be celebrated. It seems that they were successful, since Christianity had almost completely replaced the pagan religions by the Middle Ages. The first celebrations of Christmas started in 4th century CE after an official date was declared. Believers attended church, exchanged Christmas gifts, and celebrated in a rather drunken, carnival-like atmosphere. It was certainly not a sedate or dignified kind of festival, and people of all social classes came together to celebrate.
Yeah, and again, keeping in mind how self-denial and self-sacrifice are so central to Christianity, most of the fun shit is probably a polytheistic holdover. Because, surprise fucking surprise, when people have a religiously motivated reason to eat, drink, and be merry, and you tell them, no, you must be sedate and pious and self-sacrificial on this date now, people will generally tell you to kick rocks in no uncertain terms. Or to quote the Frenchman from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, we throw rotting skunks in your general direction. Go away, or I shall taunt you a second time. Moving on. Sorry, the Holy Grail meme was right there. I had to use.
It was only in the 17th century, with the wave of Puritan religious reforms, that this kind of Christmas celebration changed. In England, Oliver Cromwell and his government cancelled Christmas in 1645 to remove decadence. The festival was reinstated by Charles II when he took the throne, but the Puritans always looked down on the holiday. This was especially true of the Orthodox pilgrims who emigrated to the United States in the early 17th century. Only in the 19th century did Americans begin to embrace Christmas, and it did not become a federal holiday in America until 1870.
Yeah, for the longest time, Christmas was all but stripped of its feasting, eating, drinking, and being merry. There's a considerable argument to the fact that Charles Dickens and the popularity of A Christmas Carol basically brought back and re-mainstreamed a lot of pre-existing pagan-influenced aspects of Christmas. And it must be said that the Puritans are probably doing their religion correctly by banning Christmas and Halloween and Easter and shit. But as I have made clear in no uncertain terms, if your religion gives credit to everyone but you for the fun shit, maybe just ignore your religion for a second. Because whether it's more pious or not, if you wind up giving your opposition credit for all the fun shit, you might find a lot of people being deconverted very, very quickly. It's like people who say like the article we had last week, where everything that's unchristian is therefore the province of the devil. Well, that's a very good way of making people sympathetic to the devil's cause, now, isn't it? So maybe you should just loosen up and not give your opposition credit for everything that is like dogmatically not yours. Derp.
John Charles says Dalton's anti-Christian bias again. Yeah.
It's not an anti-Christian bias so much as it is an miserable asceticism bias. If your religion mandates you to be miserable, then selfishly, I suggest finding a new religion is in order.
So moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
Yeah, okay, so we're just going to skip. If you ignore your religion for a second or your secular ideology, do you really believe, or are you admitting you are fine ignoring reality sometimes?
No, I don't think you have to ignore reality to loosen the fuck up on your religion sometimes. Just like you don't have to ignore reality to not be a dyed-in-the-wool, everything must be political secularist. It's the simple admission that some good things about reality don't come from you, and that's okay. Like, aren't under your moral aegis, but that's okay. That's fine. Then again, I tend to be more pro-human happiness than strict authoritarian moralism, so that might actually be my bias. Maybe on some level you're supposed to be pious and self-sacrificial and flagellating of yourself, but no one has ever given me a solid reason why you should willingly flagellate yourself, unless you genuinely do think that you've done something wrong. Which, again, how long can you morally mandate someone to be miserable before you're just being a sadist? If you convince other people to be miserable on your moral behalf, that can only endure for so long before you're just a dick.
If you believe it, then the religion is reality. If you disagree, you don't believe. Same for any other worldview.
Again, I personally am fine with a reality that is comprised of multiple parts, and therefore I'm fine acknowledging that things other than me can create good shit. I think it's a myopic and authoritarian impulse to want to lay claim to all the good shit and none of the bad shit.
Not all of Christianity is like you must always suffer one.
No, but looking at it through the Puritan lens, they were trying to be more historically accurate to what Jesus wanted or espoused, and at least for the first 300 years or so of Christianity before, Romanization kicked in and the Catholic Church was established, there is a strong argument for groups like the Essenes, the Gnostics, and the Cathars being more accurate to what Jesus would have actually historically preached. So my issue is the Puritans are probably right that on some level the most dogmatic, insistent version of their beliefs does necessitate that they essentially all become celibate monks, but on some level, again, if you give your enemy credit for all the fun or good shit, you're gonna wind up deconverting people, because most people just simply do not have it in them to become celibate, self-whipping monks. Not disparaging the people who can and do that, but
Dragon Troll is saying it's like instead of saying it isn't bad to be a little indulgent, you are saying it is bad, but it's okay to be evil sometimes.
no, I'm saying good shit can come from other frameworks. And that to me is the fundamental issue here. This dogmatic authoritarian insistence of my particular frame of reference is responsible for all the good shit and none of the bad shit. I find that to be a very childish and myopic position. The in my opinion, grown up position is to acknowledge that reality is occasionally complicated, and therefore good things can come from sources other than the most morally preferable one. And if you try to purity spiral your way into we have to deny ourselves any pleasure for the sake of moral purity, more power to you, I suppose, but don't be surprised if that ends up biting you in the ass and also making everyone you want to convert miserable enough to not convert. It's the thing of if that is your calling, if you are called to be essentially a medieval flagellist, then all the more power to you as far as I'm concerned for being consistent with your moral beliefs. But it becomes inhumane and authoritarian if you go from I am called to do this to everyone should be called to do this because this is the only way to be a good person.
And I'm not gonna lie, I am gonna stop it there before you guys go on, because I feel like you can have this conversation for hours and probably have had this same thing.
Yes, we both have and probably will in the future continue to have this conversation.
Yeah.
It is a standing detente between the two of us.
If the other worldview have merit in a way yours doesn't, you should switch. Or if yours still has stuff theirs doesn't, work to combine them. Now you're good, Giantro. Look, you guys are you're far more intellectual than I am. Look, it's more of a time thing. I am also hanging on a thread of I have drank a lot of milk and stuff, trying to keep myself awake. I realize I should be drinking caffeine, but I'm trying to wane off that shit.
Yeah, we're torturing Brainstormer and preventing him from sleeping. Is the problem here? But
Again,
as
you're
to say my final two words on the matter, I don't think that every single perspective has to necessarily be reconciled. Again, I'm more than fine with the idea that the universe is a patchwork creation, and so different parts of it abide by different worldviews. And I find it very hard to believe there is any singular worldview that is the most true, especially not metaphysical or religious ones. Then again, I am the guy who can, by virtue of being a polytheist, acknowledge that all of the gods of all the various traditions probably exist, and I don't need to grandstand over which is the best one. I can make an individual choice without projecting it onto everyone else and claiming this is the one way to be a good person.
okay, guys.
Moving on.
All right. Okay. Fuck. All right. So we're just gonna be watching this Renegade cut video Dalton sent. So if you hate this video, blame him.
Blame me as usual, because again, my detector goes ding when there's cringe and or ideological stupidity, not
Right.
when there's fun.
So this okay, Renegade Cut, Merry Christmas for Renegade Cut at Charlie Brown Christmas is published December 8th, 2019.
That feels so long ago.
It really does.
Candy canes?
Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, I was wondering if there's
At the moment, there's just a green screen, but I assume there will be more things.
okay.
It's not doing the buffering wheel of death thing to me, which usually happens when it fails to load.
Okay.
Candy canes.
Candy canes.
Christmas is upon us, gently brushing its way toward us, like fog. When does the Christmas season begin? The day after Halloween? The day after Thanksgiving? When the stores first put up their holiday displays?
After Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah, that seems to be the most reasonable position.
But no one does that. It's always almost immediately. No, it's even before Halloween. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah, but like I have literally seen Christmas aisles of stuff put out before Halloween displays are, and I'm just like, there is an order to these things that, as previously mentioned, has pretty much endured like unfiltered for millennia. Can we get with the seasonal schedule here? This should not be this hard. Like, Christmas season broadly begins on Good Friday. Like everyone has known for a jolly long time now. This shouldn't be or not Good Friday, but Black Friday, excuse me. But yeah, Black Friday is the first day of the Christmas season, as everyone knows. Or if you want to push it further than that, like pretty much as soon as you're done eating on Thanksgiving, it's acceptable to start working your way towards Christmas. But yeah, Black Friday is like the official like firing pistol go shot for the Christmas season as far as pretty much everyone is concerned. And I wish the stores would fucking get on board with that. Because the one thing that makes everyone pissed off, whether you like Christmas and Halloween or even if you don't like either, is when it's fucking March and for some reason there's Christmas merch out. Anyway, candy canes.
Right. There we go.
or start playing Christmas music throughout the aisles? Or is it Christmas time when we first think of it, when the fog is first spotted? Christmas is crass and beautiful, empty and spiritual, painful and comfortable. Christmas has a great power in
I don't particularly like likening the emergence of the Christmas spirit to fog. That strikes me as incredibly nihilistic. And also, no part of Christmas is empty as far as I'm concerned. Bear in mind, when I say Christmas, I am including all the shit from the various different other festivals that have endured for thousands of years longer than it. But you know what most people know what I'm saying when I say the Christmas season or the Christmas spirit. That's why I don't join in with the modern neo-pagans who try their darndest to differentiate Yule from Christmas. And again, to me, our like response to Christmas as like polytheists should be, this is already 80% ours. Why do we need to be pedantic about the other 20%? Moving on.
telling us how we feel. If we're happy, then Christmas makes us happier. If we're unhappy, then Christmas makes us miserable. It's a barometer, a psychic, a friend who can look us over and see us inside and out, and sees the problem. We remember the heartaches of the year.
You appear to have completely excluded the possibility that someone can be miserable and made happier by Christmas. Which, speaking as someone who is frequently miserable and is made happier by both Halloween and Christmas, I kind of feel annoyed that that entire range of possibilities has apparently been excluded in your model, sir. Yes, there are people who are happy around the holidays and are made happier by said holidays, and there are people who have seasonal affective disorder who become made more miserable by the holidays. But there is also people like me who can go from a bad mood to a good mood because that special period from the end of September through the beginning of January happens, and I know I have a bunch of holidays to look forward to. That's why it's my favorite freaking 3 months out of the year. The second the fall equinox happens, i.e. on I think it's September 21st. That's the fall equinox, or is it September 30th? That's the fall equinox. But regardless, the second the latter part of September kicks in, and it becomes acceptable to start planning for Halloween and Christmas. My mood goes from 0 to 60 in about the space of a week. So I am slightly annoyed that you're ignoring the possibility that someone can be in a bad place and made to be in a better place because of the holidays. Because there are a bunch of people whose mood is not affected by same, but there are also people who get their seasonal pick-me-ups from the holidays that we celebrate in that 3-month period, 3-month span of time. Moving on.
All right.
Letting go of
Candy
old
canes.
friends, unable to find new ones. The bills that stack up around us, the strangers on the sidewalk who look at us or avoid looking at us, the cold. And then Christmas comes up, the most wonderful time of the year, and if all of the heartaches got to us,
Leon, I think you are projecting your own nihilistic depression onto Christmas a little bit here.
Actually, that's the same thing Giant Turtle said about 2 minutes ago.
And you have my sympathies. I am truly sorry that the spirit of the season does not move you, but your projection is precisely that. It is your personal projection. not to be completely, without empathy here, but it does very much sound like a you problem that you are now trying to externalize and universalize. And no, I don't accept this shit from my own family. I'm certainly not accepting it from some random asshole on the internet. And by the way, that has become a very, very fervent issue this year because everyone else in my household seems to have caught the Grinch or Scrooge-ish funk. And that annoys me, but I just have to keep reminding myself I'm not obligated to be miserable along with them. And it's much more reasonable to try to expand joy than expand misery. Like sharing joy with your fellows and loved ones is almost always better than sharing misery with your friends and loved ones. Not saying there's no room for that, because a lot of the best moments in a friendship or in a familial relationship comes from being able to commiserate with each other when you're both upset. But at the same time, it strikes me as more reasonable to try to universalize joy than to universalize misery where possible. Candy canes.
Okay. 1 sec. Candy canes.
If they reached in and tangled us up and squeezed too tight, then Christmas knows, and Christmas makes us miserable. It's a tease, a taunt. Christmas is bright and jolly and happy, and if we're not bright and jolly and happy, Christmas feels like a farce. The contrast is too much to bear. Nothing is more miserable than being around happy people. Christmas.
Oh shit.
I don't want to completely contradict you here, because obviously that is definitely a factor, and being around happy people when you are miserable can be extremely draining. But as per the aforementioned, I have spent the last month or so surrounded by miserable people who for some reason don't even want to attempt to make themselves happy. That can also be quite miserable. If you're the one person in a good or festive mood, and everyone else is dragging you down and beating your dreams to pulp, that is also quite a pain in the ass, you see. And again, I know I'm biased in favor of this because I am someone who is definitely on Team Holiday in this regard, but even if I weren't on Team Holiday, it still strikes me as a better standard of practice to try to universalize joy rather than universalizing misery. Attempting to raise people who are miserable up to the state of not being miserable makes more sense to me than resenting and being vindictive about the people who are actually happy for 5 seconds. But that again, I acknowledge that I'm biased as a person who very much does thrive on Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. And I need those things in order to be happy. But I still find it to be more reasonable to try to share joy in festivity rather than burning other people's happiness to the ground for only the fact that you yourself are miserable and you don't want to let other people be happy. One of these is an attempt to be charitable. The other is an attempt to be a miserable, nihilistic little shit.
Drenchell says nothing is more miserable than being around happy people. Sounds like a true misanthrope.
Well, and again, I acknowledge there is truth in that statement. When you are having a bad day and everyone around you seems to be getting lucky or having a really, really good day, it fucking sucks. But by the same token, sorry, my phone charger is at that phase where it doesn't like to consistently stay charging, and it just gave me the little 10% battery thing. But regardless, I can acknowledge that he is right to a certain degree. When I am having a bad day and everyone around me is having a good day, that can sting a little bit because there's this feeling of what the fuck did I do wrong? But even when I'm miserable, I would rather someone try to raise me out of my misery than drag other people down to being miserable. And I find that even people who are depressive, if they have any self-awareness or compassion for their fellow man at all, most people who are depressed, and I can speak as someone who does frequently get depressed, they don't want to cause other people that pain. They don't want to share that pain. In fact, one of the many reasons why depressed people often become suicidal, at least in my experience as someone who has had this line of thinking a couple of times, get into the mindset of I am a drain on other people's happiness, therefore the most humanitarian thing I can do is to remove myself from their lives and stop making everyone miserable. It's a dark mindset to be in, but people often ignore the part of suicidality that can sometimes be more compassion oriented. Of if I make everyone's life worse, then the most compassionate thing I can do is remove myself from people's lives so they have less of a reason to be miserable. Anyway, moving on. Candy canes. I think Brainstormer might have dozed off again.
I'm here.
Contrast
Okay.
is too much to bear. Nothing is more miserable than being around happy people. Christmas is like a complete stranger telling us we should smile more often. It's patronizing, condescending, infantilizing. How dare they? How dare they tell us how we should feel?
You have half of a point, but as usual, again, and acknowledging my biases, even as someone who has had to deal with that aforementioned quasi-compassionate line of suicidal thinking from time to time, it is better to share joy than share misery when possible. It's not always possible, and some of the best things you can do when someone is miserable is commiserate with them, is be the shoulder they can cry on. But, on balance, attempting to raise other people's spirits is a better and more conducive standard of practice than attempting to kick everyone who's happier than you in the nuts, or the metaphorical existential nuts, so that they join you in your bitterness. I can empathize with the "why is everyone around me more happy than me" complaint, especially because it really can feel shitty if you're in that sort of downward spiral depresso thinking. But if we want to make the world a better place, then surely one of the easiest ways we can do that is acknowledging the crucial difference between a downward spiral and an upward lift, or at least an attempt at an upward lift. Moving on.
How dare they assume that smiling and pretending is what we really need, or that this feeling, this pain, is something we chose, that it's somehow our fault. Christmas magnifies our pain. It shows us who we really are and how we really feel. It exposes us. We can try to avoid it, but how?
And again, I can empathize with this thinking, and there are times when I definitely am in this sort of mindset. But still, if we are to choose between burning down other people's joy and lifting other people up, or at least trying to, in some sense, meet them halfway, then even, like, there is such a phrase as "fake it till you make it." Like, that is a thing that people sometimes say, and sometimes it helps. Because if you can play through the pain, that there's another phrase with regards to this. If you can play through the pain, you might be able to ride the crest to another peak at some point. And when you're already moving downward, there is the old adage of don't look down, because if you're already in a downward spiral and then you look down, you might wind up in a roller pigeon nosedive. And quite a lot of people don't wind up coming back from the roller pigeon nosedive of I'm already miserable and I festered in my misery. So there is that. And again, I realize I'm talking at the moment from a high point because, my spiritual nature is very much tied to winter because of my own choices and my own tendencies to bargain and bond an oath. But, and in addition to that, I am also someone who is very pro-holiday, especially the 3 holidays that begin at the end of September and run through till January. So I can acknowledge that right now I am probably at the peak of my spirits, and you are, or you were when you made this video, seemingly at the ebb of yours. And my sympathies, because again, I have had that depressive spiral of I make everyone's life worse, so what is even the point of me being here? I've had those days. But as someone who is capable of trying to lift people up when they're down with regards to this, and someone who's been on the receiving end of this more times than I care to count, at some point you do have to make some kind of choice between, do I resent the world? Do I want revenge against God for the crime of being, to quote Jordan Peterson? Or am I willing to dedicate myself to the principle of the world can be a better place than it is? And to be honest with you, even when things are going good, it's more conducive to believe that maybe the world can in fact be better than it currently is, even when things are going well. Because that's how we wind up in, things that, positively shift the paradigm or raise the minimum living standard and stuff. Everything we now take for granted, every convenience of modern society, was at one point the province of a dreamer who was told by very cynical, very bitter people, the world cannot be better than it currently is, so you just have to deal with the downsides of the modern period. And every modern convenience we take for granted was the result, at some point in the distant past, of someone saying, no, I refuse to believe that the world cannot be better than it currently is, and I'm going to put in the effort to try to make that leap from the world as it is to the world as I imagine could be. Granted, that kind of utopian, quote-unquote, progressive thinking can also backfire like a son of a bitch, especially for people who are already predisposed to being cynical and miserable, but it must be said that some people who had the belief that the world can be a better place than it currently is must have been right at significant junctures, because otherwise our living standards would never improve. So for every person who was, hoping for a utopia and wanted revenge against God for the crime of being, quoting Jordan Peterson again, there have also been those dreamers who were proven to be correct. And on balance, a more positive drift is better. In fact, the desire for a more practical positive drift is often one of the reasons why people disparage this kind of utopian thinking under other circumstances, because very often the enemy of making the world a better place can also be the people who make the best the enemy of the good. The people who say, your proposed initiative to make the world better doesn't accord with my moralistic or ideological thinking, and therefore it must be bad or doomed to fail. Or if you want to make the world better, you should grab a shovel and join me in my ideology so we can, create the utopia derp. Those people get in the way of the dreamers who are correct almost every bit as often as the cynics who think the world cannot be improved under any circumstances. These are two different sort of competing spectrums of people who tell dreamers to kick rocks. There are the utopians who want to ideologically purify the dreamer and think he's bad for being more practical, and then there's the cynics who don't believe the world can be better, full stop. Moving on.
All right.
Candy canes.
Yep.
How do you avoid something as ubiquitous as Christmas? It's everywhere. Every shopping mall plays the same 5 Christmas songs on repeat. Every conversation at work ends up being about Christmas, and God help us if the office starts putting up decorations. Is that...
Again, my advice in that situation would be fake it till you make it. Because there are Jews who celebrate Christmas just because Christmas is cool. There are atheists who celebrate Christmas just because Christmas is cool. And of course, there are pagans, excluding the ones who for some reason keep insisting on separating Yule from Christmas, which is both counterproductive and a fool's errand in my opinion. But there are those of us of a more polytheistic bent who don't particularly have any particular truck with the Jesus, but do love Christmas and can even love Christmas at quite a vast degree of depth, because we know all of the aforementioned, Saturnalia, Mithra Festival, Sol Invictus, Hanukkah even to some degree, which I didn't bring up in the pagan traditions article, and I should have. The fact that the Jews have their own December festival of, light and dark and so on. But, yeah, there are those of us who, either from a secular perspective or from a polytheistic perspective, can love Christmas for its non-Christian aspects every bit as much as the Christians who insist on shoving Christ even harder into Christmas, even though it was the fundamentalist Christians who founded the first war on Christmas, but never mind. But yeah, there is very little practical reason for anyone to shun Christmas, because everyone has the potential to have some stake in it. I'm sure there are maybe even some Muslims, very liberal, very secular Muslims, who celebrate Christmas for every bit as much the same reason as the Jews who celebrate Christmas. Because some things are good, and those good things that come from outside of my framework don't have to align with my framework in order to be good. But yeah, there is very little reason not to join in the fun. And again, if Christmas makes you miserable rather than happy, you have my sympathies, but I maintain commitment to my position that it's better to share joy than it is to share misery. Moving on. Candy canes.
That's supposed to make work feel like home, because we were avoiding putting up decorations, but they just put them up by our desks or our cubicles anyway. Nobody consulted us. Nobody asked if we were having a hard time or let us lean our heads on your shoulders.
Yeah,
Talking to
companies don't
people
really
in
give
our
a shit
lives
about any of that.
It's a bunch of nods and glib reassurance.
I'm of two minds on this. One is join in the group of us that despise the soulless corporate bureaucracy for the sake of it being a soulless corporate bureaucracy. But the other half of it is workplaces are very often public places, so like no one is obligated to take your individual wishes into account just because you exist in that space. Do you see how a workplace has more right to put up Christmas decorations than you as an individual who dislikes it would have to angrily take down or smash or destroy those very same decorations? Do you see how, in this case, it very much is a sort of unidirectional system? Like, the people who are at least circumstantially joining in on the holiday have more right to put up decorations in a public space than those who disparage the holiday have for smashing the decorations to pieces. These are not, like, this is one of those hashtag we are not the same situations. I'm all for universalizing principles as much as they can be universalized, and I'm all for disparaging, against false equivalencies and so on, or even against allowing for arbitrary exceptions. But this is not a false equivalent, or this is not a false equivalency or a bias in this particular direction, apart from the aforementioned personal reasons why it might be to some degree. The person who is engaging in a holiday that the majority of people celebrate has more right to put up the decorations than someone who doesn't celebrate them would be justified in destroying those. Like, I'm not gonna go to the Muslim world and bitch at people for celebrating Ramadan. Aside from the fact that in certain more fundamentalist parts of the Muslim world, that would probably get me killed. Even in the more secular parts of the Muslim world, I would be a killjoy and a dick for doing so. And again, given how universal Christmas, at least broadly, has the potential to be for both secular and non-Christian reasons, sometimes it does simply amount to it's a you problem. Moving on. Candy canes.
Candy canes.
Or sometimes even rejection. So we surround ourselves in Christmas instead of avoiding it. We watch the movies, the holiday specials, we go and see the trees and the lights, we go to church. We buy gifts for our friends and family, the ones who will still talk to us. We do our traditions and our songs and
I'm actually gonna defend Leon more than he's defending himself a little bit here. I happen to know that Leon is an atheist. That being said, the one tradition you definitely are not obliged to engage in if you don't want to is the church part. Now, mind you, it might be a situation where, your family is kind of dragging you along, and I guess in that case, there are certain circumstances where you might be obliged to for the sake of, for the sake of camaraderie and consistency and not being a cosmic killjoy. But if you as an individual atheist are an individual atheist, you are free to engage in the historically relevant polytheistic parts of Christmas and the commercialized and secularized parts of Christmas without necessarily making Christmas the one day or the one season where you try to go to church. I'm not saying you can't do that as an atheist. I'm just saying if you are an atheist, and I happen to know that Leon is, and Christmas already makes you miserable, my brother in lack of Christ, you can avoid the parts of it that you can explicitly avoid that will probably more than anything else make you miserable. Anyway, candy canes.
We pretend. We pretend that everything is okay. If everyone is happy and everything is happy, then why aren't we happy? If Christmas can't make us happy, nothing can. For people without a significant other or children, the holidays can be a lonely time.
Yeah, dude, Jesus Christ, you are depressing.
And again, I have sympathies for that as someone who has struggled with severe anxiety and depression. And believe me, in parts of the year that aren't Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas oriented, I get very depressed very quickly. And of course, the aforementioned binding myself to the Winter Queen means that my already extant dislike of summer, even though my birthday is smack bang in the middle of summer, tends to be even worse ever since I made that bargain. But I can empathize with your depression while still advising you things like fake it till you make it, because oftentimes emotions can be chemically oriented or can be inconsistent, and sometimes when you're stuck in an emotionally temperamental malaise for no reason, faking it till you make it actually can be a viable strategy. Like if you have a practical reason to, like if your misery is tied to an external factor, then of course, the best way to alleviate that misery is to address the external factor. But as someone who struggles with anxiety and depression, sometimes it's just your brain chemistry rolled a natural one that day, and so you're in a miserable mood for no explicable reason. And in those cases where the misery is largely neurologically or self-caused, faking it till you make it can actually be the difference between eating a bullet today and just waiting until I feel better. But yeah, candy canes.
All right.
Seeing everyone celebrate with their loved ones while we do not demonstrates that contrast again. That miserable contrast between what the world says Christmas time should be and what Christmas time is for us. We're not Scrooge or the Grinch, we're depressed.
And provided that that's all you're doing, then as long as I don't have to deal with you long term, which this year definitely has been a exercise in me trying to keep up my good spirits while everyone else in my household is miserable for various reasons. So I like that is quite a proviso. But provided that you're not explicitly trying to make others conform to your misery, I have very little problem with that. But it must be said, Leon, you chose to make this video, and I can see a certain logic where you're trying to be in solidarity with other people like you who are miserable around the holidays. But as we covered, the desire to raise people's spirits and share joy is sort of axiomatically better than trying to denigrate people's spirits and share misery. Like, it's the I am trying to be in a good mood, you are trying to make other people be in a bad mood, we are not the same thing there. Like, I know, like, arbitrary distinctions and false dichotomies and shit are things, but in this particular case, in the broadest possible, like, philosophical terms, it is more philosophically tenable to try and share your joy with other people than it is to resent the world and burn down the world for the sake of sharing your misery with other people. It's the difference between trying to be a good person and lighten other people's loads, and being a resentful hipster who does, as Jordan Peterson would say, want revenge against God for the crime of being. Candy canes.
That's the worst of it, isn't it? Being depressed at Christmas, unhappy at Christmas, makes those who feel at ease during the holidays think us misanthropes. Judgment has been passed, and for crimes against Christmas we are found wanting. It's only once a year, people tell us. But is that...
Okay, again, I apologize for bringing my own personal shit into this, but especially this year, my entire December has been a long-standing attempt to maintain my good mood while everyone else's bad mood eats at the edges of my good mood, and I wind up feeling guilty and obligated to join in on the misery rather than having any outlet to try and share joy. Because it must be said that my brothers have always been much more on the Scroogey side of things than I have always been. But at least in previous years, I had the green light to try and share the joy by finding something that would make my brothers happy. But this year, my family basically vetoed gifts for each other, for all intents and purposes, and so the only person I've been able to buy for this year has been Brainstormer, and even that's in a weird place right now because I checked the Amazon shipping thing today, and I guess I must have clicked the wrong credit card when I went to buy Brainstormer his stuff. So I'm gonna have to ask my mom and address that, and hopefully she doesn't turn that into me being selfish, because the mood she's been in lately, I could easily see that you only come to me when you need help with stuff. Why are you worrying about this? And I don't want that to be a thing, but unfortunately I don't get to control other people's moods, because if I could control other people's moods, I would share the joy rather than dwelling on the misery. But candy canes. Unless Brainstormer either went away from the mic or fell asleep again. I'm guessing he had to either go to the bathroom or go get food, is what I'm guessing happened.
No, I'm right here. I'm right
Okay.
here.
Okay, I can hear you now. It was just for a while there you were very. We weren't getting anything from your end.
Yeah, everything was frozen on my end for a good minute there, so I was just trying to figure that out.
Okay, I assume it was your internet being dumb again.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
To be fair, it hasn't really happened a lot recently, so.
Yeah, we made it through, I think, all of October without any crashes of your modem, so I guess we should count our blessings.
Yeah. Anyway, Candy Canes.
Yep.
Really true. Christmas season, at least in the United States, spills its way into November and nearly all of December. It's roughly 2 months of the year.
Yeah, fair.
Linus tells Charlie Brown that it's his own fault for his Christmas time depression. He has turned it into a problem.
I mean, Charlie Brown's character is very much, he is the sort of kid who is wise, or is at least depicted as wiser than his years, and very often socially isolated or socially awkward because of that aforementioned intelligence. And speaking as a kid who was referred to occasionally as quote unquote gifted, that is indeed relatable. And I'm sure for people who are seasonally disaffective with regards to Christmas and so on, that is even more relatable in adulthood. In my case, though, Christmas was the one time of year when I wasn't going through that sort of socially awkward existential crisis of why does no one like me? Why am I so fucking alone? So, like, this is a point at which Charlie Brown and myself part company.
Well, Kenny Gaines?
Yep, candy canes.
But he hasn't. Not really. Charlie Brown is like the rest of us. He's depressed at Christmas. For him, the solution is to learn the Christian meaning of Christmas, but depression can't be solved with a speech. It's a long battle, one that is never so much won as it is brought to a stalemate.
That is the one aspect of Charlie Brown's Christmas special that I find to be both dated and incredibly myopic. Because most of the Charlie Brown Christmas special I can get on board with, because of the aforementioned sympathy I've always kind of had for Charlie Brown, at least a little bit. But the this was made in either the late 50s or the early 60s, and we have to pander to the Christians part of it always makes me feel rather uncomfortable. That's why I tend to favor Christmas specials like, in particular, there is a episode of my favorite cooking show of all time, Good Eats, which is the holiday special of it. It's called "'Twas the Night Before Good Eats," and that focuses on the aforementioned polytheistic or pre-Christian or animistic aspects of the holiday, and it makes it, and looking at Christmas through a historical rather than a religious perspective has always sat better with me than the other way around. But yeah, this is one of the reasons why I don't I will frequently revisit Charlie Brown's Thanksgiving or Charlie Brown's Easter special or some of the the movies like Snoopy Come Home and stuff. But the Christmas one is the one I revisit the least, because you can almost see the 60s era moral censor standing over Charles Roach's shoulder and going, "You are going to mention Jesus in this Christmas special, aren't you, Charles?" And then of course caving to said moral censor.
Dalton?
Yeah. Anyway, moving on. Candy canes.
Yeah. I am literally swaying because I am tired on my feet.
Yeah. So we might even have to save yours till next week, just on the basis of
that was the plan. All right.
Yeah, okay.
Kenny.
Yeah, candy canes.
We fight it all our lives and keep it at bay and hold a weapon to its throat. And maybe if we're lucky, we can find a way to make it vulnerable and make ourselves stronger. The truth is, enjoying Christmas comes after becoming happy. If Christmas will make an unhappy person
It doesn't
And
feel
again,
genuine.
sorry. Go ahead, Brainstorm. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just gonna say, I don't know what he's saying. I don't know. It just doesn't feel genuine to me.
And I mentioned this problem earlier. The problem of framing we had basically from the start of this video is he acknowledges that Christmas can make a happier person happy or a sad person sadder, but he seems to have completely sectioned off the part of the scenario where you can be a relatively sad person, and holidays in general or Christmas in particular can make you happier because it must be said that there might even be an Evo psych reason for all of these winter festivals, in addition to the aforementioned metaphysical reality I think is behind a lot of them. Maybe some portion of these festivals exist because humanity has always had some version of seasonal affective disorder, and therefore setting your, you know, holiday of plenty and joy at the darkest part of the winter can therefore make like evolutionary psychological sense. And no, that doesn't contradict my aforementioned belief that there are metaphysical truths behind it as well, because in my head, evo-psych and metaphysics don't have to be mutually exclusive, because if metaphysics is a real thing and can have a real impact on reality, then it too would have an impact on our evolutionary psychology. In the same way as not every footprint has to be made by a foot, but more often than not, if you find a bunch of footprints in the sand, it's probably because someone has recently been walking there. Moving on. Candy games.
Giant Turtle said, hold on. Giant Turtle, depression can't be beaten, just stalemate. It sounds like he's trying to make people depressed, basically saying you can only slow it down until you eventually become perpetually depressed and delete yourself, unable to even claw back territory. Will any other... okay, address that first comment, I guess.
Any other holiday?
Okay, I will read it.
Sorry.
Was I not coming through when I was reading it earlier?
No. Your internet fucked off again.
Depression can't be beaten, just stalemate. It sounds like he's trying to make people depressed, basically saying you can only slow it down until you eventually become perpetually depressed and delete yourself, unable to even claw back territory.
Oh, that comment it let you read. I thought you meant the comment above that.
No.
Yeah, that does seem to be a thing, Dragon Turtle, and that's why my consistent counter argument to this has been it's better to share joy where possible than to share misery where possible. Not saying it can always be avoided, and you know, I feel for people for whom it can't be avoided, but as I alluded to earlier, sometimes faking it till you make it can actually help, especially when there isn't a external tether to your brain's neurochemical clusterfuck. Because yeah, there are times when if you have depression or anxiety, that depression or anxiety can be triggered by literally nothing other than your own brain chemistry, and that's a son of a bitch when that happens. But as long as it is one of those situations where there isn't an external modifier or an external tether, sometimes faking it till you make it can help, because you can, you can ride the crest of the wave, so to speak. I think I made that point earlier.
Okay. Will any other holiday not make an unhappy person less happy, or any other celebration, or just people being happy around them?
I've seen enough articles, especially in the years since we've been doing this, where people will make similar arguments about Halloween or Valentine's Day or Easter or St. Patrick's Day. I've seen enough of those arguments being made that it does seem to be a thing for some people that holidays can just make people frustrated in general. And for those people, again, I you have my sympathies. I would probably be dead if Christmas and Halloween and Thanksgiving didn't help my mood so much as they have ever since I was a child. There are times when the only thing I have to look forward to is pretty soon it will be that magical, 3 months of the year when all the cool and awesome shit happens. It's one of the reasons why it's been so difficult for me this year dealing with a family full of Grinches and Scrooges, because I'm realizing just how much my joy around this time of year was dependent on Christmas, and with other people constantly poo-pooing and dogpiling on it, it's been really hard to deal with that, especially because a lot of the time I don't feel like I can speak my mind on a lot of things, and so I wind up like last night. I wound up getting into an argument with my mom, and I spent like 10 minutes crying in my room afterwards because I had so many angry or sad thoughts that I wanted to scream at her that I couldn't let it out any other way but to cry. And that really, really fucking sucks. But nevertheless, candy canes.
There's one more comment. We're all supposed to be miserable together, so your misery can have company until this guy gets happy. Something I'm sure he'd said everyone else can, at best, treat the symptoms of and make it more manageable to work through.
I appreciate your sympathy, Dragon Turtle, but you are excused from this because you actually talking to you last night was actually very, very helpful because he and I had already previously like scheduled a let's hang out tonight thing, and for like 20 minutes he let me rant and rave and vent about my mom pissing me off. So you actually were remarkably helpful at that particular, at least the portion of it that was related to that particular argument. There was still the why is everyone in my household a bunch of Scrooges this year thing that led to the crying from earlier, but yeah. You were remarkably helpful by being a source of venting last night, DT.
Hey, I'm not gonna lie, we are gonna have to wrap this up pretty quick because I literally just collapsed onto my bed.
Yeah, I was wondering how long that would take.
Okay.
Do you want to try and finish it, or do we want to just do like the last couple
we
seconds of it?
literally just have a minute left, so
Okay, so candy canes.
yeah.
And more miserable, then Christmas will make a happy person appreciate Christmas. The lights are no longer blinding. The season is no longer as cold. The people no longer the subject of envy, but of familiarity. The smiles come naturally. The traditions are no longer just pretend. We watch.
Again, your entire argument here appears to have been you completely cutting off at the knees the third option. There is the option of happy person becomes more happy. There's the option of sad person becomes more sad. But there is also that middle position, the ever crucial middle position of a person who is otherwise predisposed to being miserable can be made happy by these traditions. And there might be an evo-psych or even metaphysical reason behind some of that shit. But I will not go any further because we are on a time crunch here. Candy canes.
Watch the movies and holiday specials with sincerity now. We go and see the trees and the lights, not out of obligation, but out of genuine love. The fog is lifted. Merry Christmas, everyone.
I will give it to him for at least ending on a positive note, but my God, man, you really gilded the lily on the misery part to the point that yeah.
Sorry.
I
was gonna say, I'm gonna be honest. I don't feel like it was earned. That video was just all fucking bitching
Yeah,
and
because it
moaning,
was
to be
it was like 95 or 99% misery to 1 to 5% joy at the end. And speaking as someone who has been really, really struggling this year maintaining his Yuletide joy because everyone around me is so miserable, this more so added to the pile of reasons why this year has been hard for me than it did, spread any joy. Now, mind you, it might have been counterbalanced to the point where, because Leon I can actually argue with. Random assholes on the internet I can argue with all day long. My mom I can barely even say 2 cross words to without it potentially pissing her off. So there's the difference. I actually can argue with people on the internet because they can actually take things away from me if I piss them off. But my housemates are less amenable to that point of order. And
Right.
as recently covered, I really do need to vent sometimes. One of the reasons we do this, because sometimes I just need to remind myself that I'm not the one going fucking insane.
Okay. So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidase, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
Praise Mab and happy winter solstice, everyone. Cheers, guys. We will see you closer to Christmas Day, actually, probably. Or,
New
well,
Year's.
actually, no. We'll probably... It'll be... Is New Year's
It's
Eve
New
actually Saturday this year?
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Cheers, guys.